Okay, we're ready for action in our 18th program of Link Online. Barry Bellot, your host, good to be with you again. Today we're recording, that's the 27th, Friday the 27th of April 2018. And another great program lined up for you. As you know, we're looking at the important issues, mostly to do with Dominica, sometimes in other countries, and some comment on and perspective on these particular news items and issues. So we're going to be looking again at housing relief. I say again because it has come up before what's being done by the government. Still a lot of tarpaulins everywhere, still a lot of people concerned about they need brand new housing. Fixing the roof would help the condition and so on. And hurricane season is almost coming up again. Within less than 2 months. So we've got to tackle some of the issues there. Our second major emphasis this morning will be looking at an issue that has dominated a lot of the talk shows this week, an incident where a child was burnt. Was it maliciously? Talk about that. Another perennial issue, electoral reform. There was a big consultation this week. We'll talk about that. Then we'll also go back a little bit and review something we started talking about a few weeks ago, our local banks and how they're doing, and of course the National Bank of Dominica, which is due to have an important AGM within a couple of weeks, or within 3 weeks really. Okay, and if time permits, we'll have a little chat about politics and corruption, and some personal experiences, some personal insights on the matter, but that's if time permits. As if time permits, we will also talk a little bit about the need to get back a focus on discipline at all levels, but especially where young people are concerned. These are the crucial stages of development. Discipline has to be installed. Now, I can also say that this program, like the last one, will be commercial free. No breaks for sponsorship. Not only because we don't have any, we do have some lined up, but from next program we'll have these. But we're going to start though with some music. Now, interestingly, I've not always had music on every program, but I'm going to take a lead from no one other than the Honorable Lennox Linton. Before he was an active politician and leader of his party, the UWP, he used to have a regular Sunday talk show. And it was controversial from the beginning. Lennox always is. But he always had very good music on the show. And one of the reasons I like listening to the show was for the music. The conversation was okay, but the music was, to me, spectacular. So I thought I would introduce that a little more regularly on our show. We're going to start with one of my favorite groups all time, and which you have heard some of them before. That's the Beatles, superstars of pop music from the 60s. The song I'm going to play shows the kind of caliber music they produced, how relevant they were, and quite frankly, the reason why, to me, they stayed top of the business, tops of the pops, tops in the music world for close to a decade, because they kept moving on. They didn't just keep the same type of music or the same type of lyrics and so on. It was a variety. They moved along. I often said they were like Calypsonians. When you hear the song we're going to play for you this morning, you'll see what I mean. Let's go with it. Well, and why did I think that that song was so relevant? Because things are getting better after Maria. It's still tough. It's still quite a guay, and for some people, of course, harder than others. But things generally, even if the fact that more stores are open, more supermarkets, prices are starting to go back down right after the hurricane. A lot of things were sky high for not necessarily exploitation or money gorging. If people were bringing in things by air supplies, they would cost a little more than normally if you brought them in by ship. But the roads are a little better. Still problems with roads, even in my area, Walhouse, terrible, really terrible. But, well, at least the other road next door, Castle Comfort, is not too bad. So, progress, I don't know. But there the Beatles talking about it's getting better, it's getting better. And maybe we need to keep that in mind as we move forward, as we tackle the issues and as we bring to government's attention the things we must. But, keep in mind, some things will take time. It will take time for government to bring in or build 1,000 brand new houses. It will take time to do repairs on all the houses in Dominica that need repair. But they need to do definitely more of a focus, which they claim to be trying to do, but they're not succeeding, of handling repairs for the most vulnerable. I know several elderly people. Several. I know several. Other people know another several, and several. That must be close to, 50, 100 people that are really in urgent need. One, for instance, that strikes me is our former band leader, Music Lovers Government band leader, Mr. Hesketh Cassidy, who has served Dominica many, many years. His house, roofing, totally gone. The man is close to 100 in years. He needs help in getting his roof repaired. And then we'll talk about this interesting story of another person in Coliho that some of my friends, especially the opposition, are telling me needs help and is being apparently denied it. It's important enough to bring. Now, it was amusing because last evening on the UWP show, they have their formal program, party program on a Thursday evening, and their PRO was talking, and the first thing he spoke about was he wanted to bring Parry Bellot's attention to something. So I was listening, as I do listen to a lot of opposition things. I like to know what's happening. I listen to government things too. And he said because there was some individual in Coliho, he may have mentioned his name, who was elderly in his 80s, late 80s, and needed drastic repairs on his house. He had written the president, the prime minister, the minister for housing and so on, the representative, the parliamentary area. No response except from the president, who told him that he had passed on information he provided to the permanent secretary in housing, had spoken to the person, and maybe he should follow up there. But he said, since then, nothing has happened. And he really wanted to know if it's because he, that is the PRO for the UWP, had brought it to the attention of authorities. Was that why it was denied? And he dared me to call. Well, I tried to call, but I couldn't get on, and I suspect that UWP blocks my name from when I try to call in sometimes. But Mr. Nicholas George, I don't have your cell number, but you were good enough to make some kind remarks about me, which I appreciated. And please, get in touch with me, and together we'll try and resolve that. Because yes, all of us are Dominicans, all of us, especially the most vulnerable of us, need help by the people in power, no matter what party they come from. The point, though, I wanted to stress was that this housing thing, like relief, hasn't gone as well as it should. Now, those who are very political, right, and a lot of Dominicans are very political, they right away blame the government, they blame politics, they blame discrimination, and they blame all this kind of thing. And maybe in some instances, there's some truth to that. But quite frankly, I believe the bigger problem is the efficacy, how well in government we are planning to do those things and in fact implementing them. Does anybody in housing have a list for the week? These are the priority areas. And do they check, and did we get the recommended list from this constituency or that other constituency, and so on? And go through the names, go through the age groups, and double check here, these are genuine people that need help. Let's make sure by the weekend, in the course of the week, we have reached them. You know, when they were giving out the relief supplies, there was a lot of complaints that a lot of people were not getting. Again, it was being ascribed to politics. Only the Labour Party people are getting, and so on. I know from my own experience in that Wall House where I live, there were a lot of other people in the area who were not getting. Some really needed it. Elderly people whose sons and daughters may have been away at the time of Maria, haven't come back yet, who used to do a lot of the messages for their parents, their elderly parents. They were not there. So they couldn't come to collect stuff. There should have been some kind of listing of the area, the houses, working with the village councils, the groups, and so on, and verifying certain things. Have these people been served? They didn't come last week. Why didn't they come? And things like that. That wasn't done. We got, of course, nice reports. It's expanding. We're reaching more people in deliveries. They may have been reaching more people. But were they reaching those most vulnerable, these critical people to be served with the relief supplies? Now, quite frankly, I know the Prime Minister means well. I really, genuinely do. But, you know, sometimes the party hacks, the key supporters, break the rules. We don't care. We should care. Not only that, I ask myself, if we're hit by another big hurricane, is the relief distribution going to be any better than it was this year? I'm not convinced that it will be. I'm not satisfied. No, I'm not in the inner sanctums of the government apparatus. But in my dealings with those that I am, you know, I'm not impressed. We really need to do better in terms of how we organize the government services. And that is why, by the way, was the basis long ago for government coming up with this public support system, where the Prime Minister himself could deal with matters very urgently, very quickly, compared to the normal welfare services. Incidentally, I spoke earlier of Mr. Nicholas George, the PRO for the UWP, talking about he had not been gotten a reply from any of these government people. And I would have told him, if I was able to get on the telephone line and got through, that, you know, government people are, you know, inundated with a lot of requests for all kinds of things. Now the guy comes to work, whether it's the Minister for Housing or so on, and there are 10 or 20 or 40 people who have tried to call him, sent letters and whatnot. So he's going through, oh yeah, this person more, and then he comes across the name Nicholas George, UWP. That's the fellow that just cursing up the Prime Minister, and he puts it aside. Because on the same program, Nicholas George was repeating a statement that the UWP love to keep repeating. That is absolutely not true. They claim that the Prime Minister was saying that nothing, no constitution, no law can stop him doing what he wants. The Prime Minister never said any such thing. What he did say some years ago on the eve of an election, when people were objecting to him being a candidate, they thought he had connections with another country and may not therefore have been eligible and so on. And he was telling them that, in a way, according to the rules as you read in the Constitution, and according to the law as to do electoral, he cannot really be stopped. You may have something in your head that think, oh, he should be stopped, but not according to the rules. They interpreted at the beginning to say that he said nothing can stop him being put up as a candidate. Then they made it even worse and said he's now saying, and they sometimes say, but the Prime Minister, he never responded to that, so maybe it was true. The Prime Minister cannot respond to every little criticism. And sometimes, even if it's a major criticism, when he responds, they will then reinterpret what he has said and misinterpret it, and it just goes on and on. PM presumably has said, he's not going to comment on that. Serious people, intelligent people know that statement is not true. And UWP can repeat it how many times they want, they know it is not true, as a lot of the things that they say. The problem is that when they keep repeating these outrageous lies, if I may use that word, it doesn't help them be accessible and the other side to be willing to work with them, because, you know, you're making enemies. How can you work with people who are always saying things that they cannot prove, that are not true? They're just innuendos and so on. Not that the government mustn't still try to work with the opposition. That's what Parliament is there for, and I keep saying there must be regular parliamentary sessions. But if the Prime Minister decides after Erica he's going to invite the opposition to work with him and so on, give them certain powers and whatnot, and that barely lasts 2 months because a lot of infighting and the thing got off. He said, no, these kind of people are really not interested in working together. You think he's going to try it again after Maria? He considers it a waste of time. And on that matter, I probably would support his position. Okay, because the opposition have not realized, really, as the latest guy to abandon them, the non-honorable Mr. Joseph Isaac, now a minister, he said that they're not willing to accept that things have changed since Maria and there must be a different focus of the party. We have to take a more accommodative role with the elected government. That is there whether you like it or not. They were elected as the executive arm for the country. You know, so if, you know, so Mr. George, tell your people, you know, try and be a little nicer in their criticism. They have the right to criticize the government, but, you know, keep it within. And I know some of your political people are even more extreme in their support for the opposition and their venom for the government. But, you know, we have to try and bring down the rhetoric. But as I said, Mr. George, I will certainly work with you. Give me a call and we will try and get something going there. I also wanted to make the point that one of the outrageous things that the opposition have been saying is that, oh, all the institutions of government of Dominica are failing. They all have been infiltrated by Skerrit and working. Every so often, government and the courts get a decision I don't particularly like. Just last week, I think it was, the court ruled that the case against the Salisbury people should be held back whilst a constitutional motion against the Riot Act, whether it in fact was a fair act given our constitution, in fact should go all the way to the High Court. You know, one of the government's lawyers was not entirely happy with that. I think he said they're going to appeal the petition. But it shows that the court now and then will give a decision against the government. What does that mean? It means that our courts are in fact free. They are in fact free. But, you know, this constant story that our institutions, our churches, our courts, our semi-government statutory corporation and are all influenced, you know, corruptly by the government. We have to stop saying that message. One of the big things also they've been saying is that the international agencies are losing confidence in the government. There was one guy and he was so obnoxious in his statement. I'll mention his name. That was Dr. Thompson Fountain, who quite frankly I thought was going to be kept busy in South Sudan. I don't know if he's been fired or whether his contract has not been renewed, like what I believe happened with the IMF before. He seems to have spent a lot of time in Dominica. But there he was saying, oh, they've all have lost confidence in government and so on, kept repeating that in all kinds of ways. That same week, the World Bank was saying, well, they're giving more money to the government and expanded certain programs for the government. Is that an agency that is losing trust in the government? You know, so again, intelligent people, fair-minded people, people who read and know what's going on, know a lot of the stories UWP concocts are in fact not true. And unless they change that style, you know, the prospects for the next election are not going to be so good. So much for that, because we really have a lot to cover. Next big item, the child who was burnt. Now that was a big story this week, and in fairness to the talk shows, I'm not a big fan of the talk show, although I listen to them. I find, you know, the political rhetoric on both sides is too much. But sometimes on the opposition side, they bring out some interesting stories. And I credit Matt Peltier, who will follow that up to a degree. He does a lot of bad things as far as I'm concerned, but he does some good things too. And this was one of them, where he exposed the fact that a child had been seriously burnt, but in fact no action was being taken by anyone in terms of investigating the circumstances of that burning. And he and a lot of his scholars, of course a lot of them still try to blame the government for that and try to blame the Prime Minister for that, you know, said no, something had to be done, the police had to do more. And I think one person who had called him was a policeman who said no, nothing had been done because the parties involved didn't want to go further with the incident. But, you know, something as serious as that, especially when there's a child involved, really, you have to take it further. And apparently, the police then changed their mind, decided, months after the incident, apparently decided to take it further and have gone to court with the matter. Now, a lot of things have been said on the talk shows about the incident. A lot of, again, outrageous statements made. And in one person, I think it was yesterday morning, Thursday morning, in fact, even Matt Peltier couldn't read the letter in detail because the language was so obnoxious, was so rude. You know, I mean, with the F word everywhere and so on. Absolutely uncalled for. Absolutely uncalled for. But it showed, you know, perhaps, you know, how significant this whole thing was. Now, the Chronicle covered this story, and yes, in today's edition, and I think they have given perhaps what I think is the clearest version of what is going on there. So I'm going to read it from the Chronicle, today's paper in toto. It says, its headline, her front page, grievous bodily harm on a minor. I read. Questions, gruesome pictures surfaced all over social media. That's another thing I forgot to mention. Social media, big on this story. Again, social media can be bullying. Social media can say and print a lot of things that are not quite the whole story, but sometimes they have their value. Like when pictures emerge of police in the States brutalizing blacks, killing blacks for no good reason. Fortunately, sometimes you have the camera evidence, so these cameras have a function, and spread by social media. Anyhow, they're saying those pictures emerged of a 15-year-old who was severely burnt, and after a month of public outcry, the police have now arrested and charged one adult male for allegedly causing grievous bodily harm to a minor. Karina Eugene of Bells, residing in Massac, was brought before the court on April 26th. That would have been Thursday, so that's hot off the press, yesterday, where the charge of GBH, grievous bodily harm, was read to her. She was not required to plead because it's an indictable offense. However, information obtained in court stated the incident occurred on March 17th, 2018 at Check Hall, Massac. I said about 2 years ago, so it's more like a month ago. At the court hearing, the prosecution first objected to bail, but later withdrew the objection on humanitarian grounds as they learned that the accused is pregnant. Bail was then set in a sum of $12,000 by Magistrate Bernard Paquette. However, Eugene was unable to provide the court with a proper surety. As a result, she is remanded in custody at the Dominica State Prison until she is able to do so. Divine guidance perhaps working there, because she certainly deserves to be, severely remanded for that act. Incidentally, I don't know if it's true, but in part of the conversation on the talk show, it was alleged that she was actually a family member, and that she had a say in whether the matter should be brought to court initially, and that's why she wasn't keen. Anyway, brought to court, and apparently with very severe charges against her. The magistrate then inquired about the whereabouts of the child. However, such information was not forthcoming. Now that's kind of strange. You would have thought the police by now would have gathered enough evidence to know exactly where the child is. However, it was then revealed that the child's mother is deceased, the father is overseas, and the whereabouts of her caretaker are unknown. That's disturbing, and that points to guilt in various places when people take off and so on. Anyhow, Police Prosecutor Sergeant Davidson Cadet expressed much frustration over a fact that a welfare officer was not present in court as he had limited information to provide the magistrate with. Again, that's hard to understand. The welfare department didn't see the importance of that case to make sure at least one officer was there in court, and the police are relying on that welfare officer. That's what I was pointing to earlier. Some of our departments in government are not working as they should. Incidentally, that might include some of our nurses, by the way. We'll get on to that. A preliminary inquiry is to be held on September 6, 2018. Now, that seems very far from now. However, at the Rosa Magistrate Court to determine if there is enough evidence for the accused to be tried on the charge at the High Court. Eugene was represented by Attorney at Law Julian Prevost. And I'm glad she was represented. We like when people prosecuted are represented. It's not always possible, and they go to legal aid, which does a certain amount of that, but perhaps not as good as a private lawyer. And this lady had a private lawyer, but still is on remand in jail, for instance. Now, I'm going to leave it at that, and I compliment the Chronicle for a very, very good story. In other words, they didn't go with all the nonsense that was on the talk shows or in social media. These are the facts as presented in court. Okay, moving along, and perhaps this is appropriate time, we've gone on long, for my other piece of music today. Going to be Beatles again. And this time, I'm going to give you a hint of what this song is about. so you can follow the lyrics and appreciate it, as I always do. It's about rain. About rain. Hey, did we have a lot of rain in Dominica the last few months, last 6 months, and so on? And about what you have to do with your roof, and so on, and patching up, and so on, you know, and then maybe we need to accept life as is, and so on. Listen to this other gem from the Beatles. Okay, and we're back with some summarizing stories, or stories in summary. About a month ago, one of my previous programs, a little more than a month maybe, I spoke about the local banks, two of which had published their financials. And I read out some of the interesting financials as reported in print in the local papers. And the bottom line was actually both banks had lost money. By that time, it had occurred to me I should have done more research, because the figure for one bank in terms of their loss was quite huge, and I wondered whether that covered other banks. As you know, our banks, well, the two banks I'll mention, the Royal Bank and the First Caribbean, both of them, you know, are well represented in the OECS. I didn't know if this was a combined financial statement or whether just for Dominica. I should have found that out before. I didn't. I apologize. So in the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I got that. And the information is that the figures were for local transactions. So Royal Bank had reported a loss of some $4 million. First Caribbean had reported a loss of $1 million and something, I forget. Actually, I have the figure there, but it's not critical. They also had reported a loss. Now, you might recall also about 2 years ago, I think it was, the Royal Bank had taken a decision to close, not to close savings accounts, but to start charging interest on savings accounts. You can understand why now. They were desperate to try and get their earnings up, and they figured the only way they can maybe do that is, you know, to start charging on savings accounts, especially those that were considered semi-dormant. In other words, people may use them once a year, twice a year, but it's not worth the transactions involved and the monitoring and so on. So they're going to start charging interest every month. But it may have backfired because a lot of people withdrew their funds from Royal Bank. Somebody in Royal Bank told me they didn't mind because really it was costing them a lot more to operate these savings accounts. So maybe both sides ended up a little happier after that. But the bottom line, they lost $4 million. So some of us who like to bang figure, these banks are exploiting us, they're making millions of dollars on our back. That's really not the truth. The banks are struggling like a lot of other people. And furthermore, we can tell you that a lot of these banks, especially our own national bank, we'll talk about them just a little more later, have a lot of loans out there that are not performing as they should. In fact, in the case of the National Bank, the last annual reports puts the figure at about 3/4 of their loans. And that was before Maria, that are not performing. In other words, delinquent. People are either not paying at all or not paying as much or as regular as they should. And that's, of course, a problem for the banks. I know they're trying to take action on that, and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, that now has a lot of power to oversee all our banks, not so much now the government, but the ECCB, and they are taking some serious measures on that. How quickly that problem can be solved, we're going to have to wait and see, because especially after the kind of hurricane seasons the Eastern Caribbean have been experiencing, businesses is not exactly booming in any quarter. Well, I shouldn't say that, because there are some areas of business that are booming. You ask some of the building supplies people, they will tell you. In fact, I compiled a list for my last Link magazine of the businesses that are doing very well since Maria and those that, of course, are not. There wasn't space to include that. It will be in our next issue, but maybe in our next program I'll read out some of the business, because it's kind of funny in parts. Some of the people who did well, by the way, were the paros. Everybody was giving them jobs to do cleanups and so on. They did very well. So, there were some surprising winners in that game, but some unfortunate losers, especially the private sector, who got hit, very badly by looters, quite apart from hurricane damage. Okay, I said I would talk a little more about the National Bank, because they have an AGM coming up very shortly. I think it's I think it's about the 18th of actually I have the annual report there, which will surely state when that is to be. Sometimes finding the exact documentation takes a little time. But I've got it right here. It's on Friday, May 18th at the Parish Hall from 9 a.m. So that's our own national bank, the National Bank of Dominica. Incidentally, the bank is still primarily owned by the government, but they don't quite have the majority shares. So that is split up among the public and among some key institutions like the credit unions and Social Security and so on. But the AGMs are usually very, how should I put it, entertaining events. A lot of people ask a lot of questions, some of them embarrassing to the banks, but that's shareholders' rights. And of course, the last couple of years have been good. I don't think for the last 2 years they've been able to pay dividends. They were impacted very badly in that period by the scandal to do with Clico and British American Insurance. I say scandal because some of what occurred in that institution, which was owned by a Trinidad company and partially by their Barbados counterparts, some of these guys, we got away with murder. The kind of scandalous investments they had made, the way they paid themselves and so on, and they made sure a lot of them were living in Miami by the time all this got out, and therefore they haven't been brought to court, which is very unfortunate. Typical, I shouldn't say typical, but a lot of what happens with white collar crime, the big boys get away. We have to get a little more acquainted with that kind of thing, because justice must apply to all. It's not because you're a big businessman or you're a big investor or you're a big government official or you're even a big judge that you get away with unseemly behavior, especially when it affects so many others. But as I say, a lot of loans given to Clico and so on, and British American had to be written off. And National Bank, I know the credit unions were also badly affected by the thing. But I haven't had time to reach the accounts part of this. I was in fact reading what I thought was even more important, the auditor's report. But that seemed to be in order. It did point out about some of the problems they're having with performing loans, as I indicated earlier. But it highlighted how auditing now has to be very, very crucial for the banks and for the shareholders to know. In the old days, the auditor's statement in the formal bank, I should show you actually what it looks like, the cover of National Bank, very attractive cover, and their annual reports are always very well presented. I compliment their management and their artwork team for that. The auditor's statement about what he's had to do, it was usually on one page. You know, we've had to think a lot of the accounts are presented by the bank itself, but we check certain things and we have the right to query and so on, in one page. Now, their statement is on 3 pages. It tells you how much more thorough they have to be when they do those things, and why they get paid the sums that they have to get paid. It's probably well deserved. So maybe next time, not maybe, almost certainly, we will talk more about the National Bank. It's important to us. Okay, well, that ends our formal bit. I unfortunately were not able to monitor how much time. I'm going to assume that I still have a few more minutes and talk a little bit about what I call politics and corruption and some personal experiences. I say there was something we were supposed to talk about which we have not. It was electoral reform. That's key. And we will talk about that now. This week there was I think an important consultation that took place, not called by the government as these national things normally are, but some groups that generally are not happy with the pace of their reform, of electoral reform, and mostly of course the opposition parties and so on, but other groups, trade unions, civil service, they seem to have been well represented. Of course, those doing most of the talking were the opposition, official opposition groups, who have been campaigning for what they call electoral reform for many years, in fairness to them, maybe more than a decade. The key issue at the time was the bloated list of electorate. It's close to 70,000, and that's about our population. So they figure, look, there are a lot of names there that shouldn't be there. Why don't we remove them? Well, by law, they have to be careful how they remove names. Usually somebody must supply a death certificate, or somebody give enough evidence, well, this person, you know, is dead or is disappeared from Dominica for 20, 30, 40 years. Everybody thinks he's dead. You may not have the certificate, but you know, he's not around. And they have to do that. Interestingly, one political person that was concerned about this so-called bloated list decided he's going to do the right thing, he thought, and submit names from his area that he knew the people were dead, and therefore they should be removed from the list. Now, I can mention his name now because you know, politicians expect their name to be mentioned here. It was the former leader of the UWP, Mr. Ron Green, and he submitted this to the electoral people to take out the names. Now, I can't remember the exact number he had there, but it may have been somewhere between 10 and 20. And would you believe, close to half of the names submitted, there were objections that no, the people were still alive, or they were temporarily in Guadeloupe or Martinique or something. And it was embarrassing all around. I don't think he would ever repeat the attempt to wholesale try and remove names. So, you know, there are risks in removing names, because it's better to have names of people who are dead, because they just won't show up, and you have ways of monitoring who's coming, lots of ways, as opposed to removing the name, and when they come to vote, you know, there's a problem that they're not on the list. And again, the government people have often used that explanation. A lot of it also is a lot of people who are away. Now, under the law, up to 5 years, you have up to 5 years to visit at least once. And if you haven't visited, then strictly speaking, you should be removed. But you can understand a monitoring system has to be set up. Now, it has never been set up as far as I know, and maybe the opposition have a point that the electoral people should be given that kind. Now, it's going to be a complicated system, and maybe that's why they're afraid to start tackling it, but maybe they should begin the exercise. But the other area of concern with the electoral reform for many years has been the fact that the government has been allowed to bring in a lot of people to vote. and that shouldn't be allowed. In fact, that is tantamount to bribery, and it's being done. Now, you ask yourself, if that's against the law, how come there have been no successful cases on that basis if in fact government is doing that? Well, the truth of the matter is that government has been doing that, helping some people to come to Dominica. But all the opposition parties existing now, including the Freedom Party and UWP, have been doing it too. It only became an issue when the current Labour government and the Labour Party got very good at doing this kind of things, organizing for people to come here to vote. And incidentally, there are 2 Caribbean countries where it's official, legal, and all that kind of thing. One of them is St. Kitts. The other name I have to research to get. Okay, so it's not a because the law says you can bring people from from Portsmouth if they actually registered in Roseau. You can bring them to Roseau to vote and so on, provided transport and kind of thing. So therefore, if the person is in Antigua, some people say, well, I'm just helping him to come to where he's registered to vote and so on. But as I say, the Labour Party has done very well in that and far outclassed the others, and therefore they make it an issue. Now, that's the point that they have to recognize and admit. It is true some people will say, hey, it's not because these 3 or 4 people have been doing something wrong that therefore we must accept the others continuing to do it wrong. The thing is that if it's been a practice and a custom, then you cannot just decide all of a sudden it's completely immoral, completely wrong to do, and expect the government to just go along with that. You have to make a case why maybe we should insist that that should be the rule and maybe define it a little more. The government decided it's going to define it a little more in their idea of electoral reform, but put it such that, yes, you could bring in the people that you thought were on your side to vote, because you're not going to influence them by bribing them, because they're so already on your side. It's only if you know these 3 guys are not on your side and you're paying for them to come to Dominica, then there could be elements of bribery, is what the government interpretation. That makes sense to a degree. On the other hand, you can say the opposition say, but wait a minute, will we ever have a level playing field? Because the government will always have an advantage. They have, a lot of resources. They have a lot of friends because they're in government to organize a lot of things for them. So they will always outclass us when it comes to doing the things they say to bring in, a lot of voters to help with the vote. I think they have a point too. But what I'm saying is that don't assume that because the government has influence, that therefore it will always control an election. As we see from time to time, even in the Caribbean, a lot of governments lose the election, and they lose it because, by the way, an effective opposition can blame the government for a lot of things that the government isn't responsible for. But because they're government, everything ultimately kind of goes to them. And they can put so much pressure on the government and let the public know and feel that the government is doing well bad, so the government loses it no matter how much money it spends on the campaign and how much treating it does, that to say, organizing all kind of shows and so on. That's another thing that the opposition is concerned about, this thing called treating, where you treat somebody to something that they figure is beyond the normal, and therefore you're tempting to bribe them. I will never understand if a government or opposition have a show and they bring in a big performer. Names recently put Morgan something, I forget the name, that's not my big fan on my big fan list, but high entertainers are the young people and very famous and so on. Pay for them to come. Both parties are now, but of course the Labour Party has more resources, so it does a bigger job in that. I'm personally not convinced that all of a sudden going to make everybody who attends that show is going to vote for the Labour Party because the Labour Party brought down that performer. Nonsense. But they've brought that up as an issue. But what it seems to me is that if we're going to make progress, the 2 parties, when I say 2 parties, the ruling party and all the other opposition parties, need to come together in a formal way, but with a less formal arrangement than you have in Parliament. And let's talk amidst somebody who both sides think can be reasonably neutral and can keep the parties on a reasonable behavior whilst the debate and the discussion is going on, to talk a bit how can we reasonably to compromise on these issues, because a compromise has to be made. As the Prime Minister mentioned just actually this morning in a broadcast, government was going to pass a lot of election reform laws at the last, I don't know if the last thing, I think the sitting before, but it got a little out of hand. There was a lot of protests, some of which got violent, And there was a potential for even more violence. They decided to just end the session of Parliament. But what the government keeps saying it wants to bring as electoral reform, clearly that's not what the opposition has in mind. That needs to be brought as electoral reform. So reason dictates that come, people, let's get together and see how we can thrash out some of those differences as reasonable people, and almost certainly have to come on some kind of compromise if we love our country and want to bring down this political rhetoric. Or we can stay like the Arab nations and the Muslims, and they'll stay fighting each other and criticizing each other, and even, hope we never come to that, killing each other, because they will not compromise on anything. They're still killing, by the way, the Muslims against Israel, because there was a big land acquisition decades ago set up by the UN. Some people didn't think it was fair. The Muslims didn't think it was fair. So as far as they're concerned, Israel is an illegal country. They'll continue to oppose them. When they get a chance, they'll begin to attack them. Come on, come on. It's time that you guys sit together and compromise. That has to be done in Israel and the Arab countries. That has to be done in Dominica within the opposition groups. Okay? And by the way, not that I'm asking, my wife will probably strongly disagree, but you know, if in any way I like to think that I can listen to both sides. I am known to be partial to one side, and in a way I am, but I like to think I'm reasonable. If I can help with perhaps another person to help chair a kind of discussion where, you know, both sides can, because, you know, with that electoral consultation that took place, and again, I didn't, by the way, mention who organized it. It was the Group for Good Governance or something like that, under Adjuna, who talks generally a lot of outlandish things I'm not particularly comfortable with. But on this initiative, I commend him and his group. It was a very worthwhile endeavor. But then they, and even Freedom Party on our program, were condemning the Labour Party for not accepting the invitation to attend. As I tried to tell the Freedom Party before they started to attack me personally on their program, quite unnecessary. Did he really expect a Labour Party to send someone there? He would be heckled anytime he opened his mouth. He will be booed. People will be shouting out things at him. You know, you didn't really expect a Labour Party. And quite frankly, if you were in government, the same thing would apply. Of course, no, you would always send somebody. Who they're kidding. So, you know, you got to be reasonable on that. So, as I say, I commend the initiative in the consultation, but let's take it to the next level or the next stage and try and see if we can have another level of discussion among the party people and see if the big issues they can work out a kind of a compromise, because both sides have a point. Both sides have a point. Okay, we were going to talk a little bit about politics and corruption. I had some notes there, mostly because I wanted to, you know, that's another thing that's bandied about. Everything is corrupt, especially politicians. Well, and they say lawyers too, but lawyers are in a special class, so are politicians, by the way. But you know, there's so much things bandied about this present government, how they are excessive, they're greedy, everything is corrupt, and they'll do anything to be re-elected. And I tell myself, doesn't UWP willing to do anything to be elected? And when they're in government, wouldn't they do almost anything to stay in power? All the parties act the same way. So, you know, maybe the truth will come out somewhere about both sides. Well, as far as I'm concerned, when the UWP makes allegations of corruption against Labour, I can show them and prove to them where their past activities in and out of government have been equally corrupt. No, I say equally versus the allegations of this present government. But even if the present government was guilty of what they're saying, UWP are even more guilty in government and out of government. A lot of their corruption issues have ended up in court, you know. So when you have to vote, even if you have doubts about the credibility of this government where corruption and greed is concerned, you would think twice about electing the present UWP. I tell them to keep that in mind. But I also, in fairness and honesty, say Alan Stanford, remember he was the billionaire who operated in Antigua, owned airlines and hotel restaurants and cricket playing fields and so on. Billionaire. Yet was later arrested for a Ponzi scheme, $80 million. Absolutely legal, and he knew that and so on. Took me by surprise. Bill Cosby, someone I admired for years and years and years. respected him. Now it's been proven, and I, began to accept that as true long before the trial that ended yesterday. What he was doing in terms of literally raping women, drugging them so they don't even know what was happening. I mean, my respect for this guy. But the point I'm making, I would never have suspected him. So, we've got to keep that in mind about anybody. But, before we condemn people, let's get real evidence. Okay. But I wanted to say something about Rusie Douglas. Not Rusie Skerritt. Rusie Douglas. Because of all the politicians I've known, and I'm old enough to have known all of them since independence, dealt with all of them, and worked for a lot of them, including Edison James, in a minor way. I won't do details of that. And I talk with all of them, except the present UWP leader. He won't have anything to do with me. But I've worked with, as I say, all of them in the capacity as prime ministers. Rusie Douglas, to my mind, was absolutely the most honest in the whole bunch. The one who was not concerned about making any money for himself. And that resounded once. I remember seeing on TV, he was prime minister then, government, and he was going to make a trip, an official visit. And they were showing him leaving, saying goodbye to his mother in Portsmouth, and the TV camera was carrying that. And there is his mother saying goodbye and so on, take care of it. Oh, and by the way, she puts her hand in her pocket and she takes a $50 note. Look, hold that. You're always running out of money and this kind of thing. So keep that, for emergencies and so on. And I said, well, she really knows her son. Because Rusie was the kind of person, literally, the last $50 in his pocket and somebody came begging or whatever, he tried to break it at least to give them a $5 or $10 or whatever. He was that kind of person. So always giving out whatever money he had. You never thought he came from a very wealthy family. But he was that kind of person. Now, at the same time, that's a great attribute on his case. But he will tell you that straight. He was not the kind of person I felt would make a good prime minister. Am I saying that prime ministers must be greedy and so on? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that you want a man of the world to be prime minister, who knows how to get opportunities, how to move and whatever. Rusie was not kind of person. Rusie was a nice guy. Rusie was a motivator and an inspirator on his myriad of causes, but mostly to do with black pride and so on, and black freedom all over the world. And maybe there was a need for that. But, as a prime minister, quite frankly, he didn't cut it. He still remained my friend, but I was never impressed. But, so it tells you a little something of who makes a good leader. Well, I think. And I'm trying to tell you, and there was one person in, the Cadres guy in Peter Wickham in Barbados, who once said he knows a lot of people who don't mind businessmen as politicians, but certainly don't want a priest to be a politician. And he knew what he was talking about. A businessman, a lot of people have skeptical about their integrity and honesty and how they price their goods and so on. But at least sometimes they make better businessmen. They know how to do a good deal for themselves and for the country. A priest, will be preaching priests everywhere and so on. But will he do much for development? I'm not sure. In fact, I'm pretty sure it won't. That's why priests are not often political leaders or governmental leaders. So, we have to weigh those things when we decide who will make a better leader for our country. And by the way, as I end there, check the link that's out. We've started our rollout of 40 names of people we think have served the country well. Not politicians, we've left them out in a special category. There's a special competition for who you think was our best prime minister. But we're highlighting, people who have done well in industry, in commerce, in small business, in sports, in community work, and this kind of thing. All these were builders of Dominica, the last 40 years of our independence. So we're highlighting them. Pick up your copy. You'll get one at Jay's supermarket. Okay, that's it for our 18th, or is it 19th, program put on so well by CBN4. We thank them. We thank particularly our producer, Alex Toussaint Jr., and your host, Barry Ballard, there for telling you goodbye.